My name is Becky Morgan. I teach at Stetson Law School in Gulfport, Florida, and I want to talk with you briefly about what elder law attorneys need to know about elder abuse. Elder abuse is generally considered an umbrella phrase to use when you're referring to a specific type of elder abuse. And those different types of elder abuse are falling into the categories of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Though there are some additional categories of elder abuse, so I want to talk to you in a little bit more detail about the additional categories, as well as giving you some subcategories to abuse. So, for example, abuse may be physical abuse, it could be emotional or psychological abuse, or it could be sexual assault. Neglect, as the name implies, is a failure to provide care by someone who is responsible to do so. Exploitation is financial. Two other categories that we often hear about when we're thinking about elder abuse is abandonment and then self-neglect. The three most common types we think about again are abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Now, self-neglect is frequently referenced in the context of elder abuse because many times in adult protective services statutes, the adult protective services statutes will cover abuse, neglect, exploitation, and self-neglect. The thing that's different about self-neglect from the abuse, neglect, and exploitation is in abuse, neglect, and exploitation, we have a second party, the perpetrator, whereas self-neglect is the failure on the part of the individual to provide the necessary care for him or herself. So whether it should be lumped in with elder abuse is why I put the question mark by the slide that you're looking at, but it is often covered in the Adult Protective Services statutes. So let's look a little bit more at the different types of elder abuse, and as we go through this, we'll look at some of the red flags or indicators, if you will, about it. For elder abuse, when you're looking at sources, one of the good sources to look at to learn more about elder abuse is the National Center for Elder Abuse. This is funded through the Administration on Aging. The NCEA website gives you lots of information about the types of elder abuse, definitions, profiles of victims, profiles of perpetrators, and indicators for elder abuse. So in terms of the types of elder abuse, you have the victim or the elder who is considered to be vulnerable. And then there would be the specific type of elder abuse. Abuse, as I said earlier, physical, emotional, or sexual. Physical is infliction, threat to inflict, or a deprivation of basic needs. Emotional would be yelling at somebody. For example, it could be psychological, it could be mental, it can include pain, anguish, and it's delivered through verbal or nonverbal. So you might see a person who is psychologically abused because the person is being shouted at all the time about what a stupid person, things like that. Sexual abuse of an elder is, as the name implies, a non-consensual sexual contact of any type, and those cases do in fact occur. Neglect, one of the other types of elder abuse, is the failure or refusal to provide what I would consider basics like food, shelter, health care by one who is responsible to care for the individual. The various state statutes will define abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and in addition to the definition will indicate the duty, for example, in a neglect case, because it's one responsible to provide this type of care, and so we will see definitions in state statutes that define who is the perpetrator in a neglect case. Exploitation is involving the money or property, and it would be illegal, and it's where the perpetrator is taking, concealing, misusing money, assets, or property of the victim. We see financial exploitations quite a bit, unfortunately, and you may see them in your practices as well. It's a significant problem for elders to be financially exploited. Abandonment is a different type of elder abuse according to the NCEA. It is a person who has responsibility for the custody or care of the elder, and that person deserts them. A person just abandons them. So the types we most often hear about are abuse, neglect, or exploitation. But keep in mind, within those three, there are some subcategories, especially in abuse, the physical, psychological, and sexual. And note that in some instances, abandonment will be included in the umbrella under elder abuse. Now, a little bit more about self-neglect. As I indicated, self-neglect doesn't have a perpetrator, it's the victim. And so when you look at what NCEA has to offer about self-neglect, the takeaways are that the elder, her actions threaten her own health or safety. And some of the examples that could be given regarding self-neglect would be the victim, the elder, if you will, doesn't seek health care, doesn't take her medication, doesn't dress appropriately for the weather, things like that. And according to NCEA, a significant number of the cases reported to Adult Protective Services are cases that involved self-neglect. One of the things we always think about when we're talking about elder abuse is just how bad is the problem. And I'm going to tell you that it's really hard for us to give you a firm, accurate number as to how many cases there are. We could tell you that there are a lot, and from the studies, it appears as though that would be true. But if you wanted to know how many specifically, we would have a little bit more of a challenge in giving you those numbers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have found so far, and then I'm going to tell you why it's hard to get us concrete numbers. There have been some reports done and some studies done over the years. One of the most significant was done in 1996 called the Incident Study, where they were trying to find out exactly how many reports of abuse were being filed. And they look at reports that are given to Adult Protective Services. The incident reports were described as the tip of the iceberg. And so if you think about an iceberg, you know that just a small amount is above the waterline and the bulk of it is below the waterline out of sight. So the tip of the iceberg above the waterline would be those cases that are being reported, meaning that there are a whole lot of cases that go unreported. It is hard to capture data for various reasons, including that it varies from state to state in terms of how the reporting is occurring, what the definitions may be, although I will say to you that the definitions will have a lot of similarities, and the fact that for many reasons people do not report. If you're interested in learning more about why people do not report elder abuse, you would want to take a look at some of the resources I'm going to talk to you about at the end of this presentation. The incident study that I referred to earlier indicated 500,000 cases of domestic abuse. Another study indicated probably 1 in 5 cases gets reported. So when I tell you it's the tip of the iceberg, you can see where the NCEA is coming from with these numbers. NCEA also indicates that when they're looking at these types of cases, neglect is the most common type of elder abuse that they're seeing reported. Why people don't report? There's lots of different reasons why. Your clients, if you have clients who've been victims of abuse, may be very unwilling to report. They're embarrassed. They don't want to get the perpetrator in trouble because the perpetrator may be a family member. They're afraid of the consequences if it becomes known. They may not be in a position to report because they're isolated, or they may have dementia and don't even realize they've been a victim. There's lots of different reasons why elder abuse appears to be underreported. From the data we have, we do believe that it is a growing problem and a significant one. Let's think a minute about why elders would be targets of elder abuse. So I want to give you some generalities, some commonalities, and some theories. You can look at the different individuals who have been victims of reported elder abuse, and you can see some similarities, but you can also see some differences. But from the experts and the information that is out on the NCEA website, it appears as though there are some commonalities. One is, in some cases, the victim will be dependent upon the perpetrator. That would be true especially in neglect cases where there is this relationship and the perpetrator has failed to fulfill the relationship by providing these basics. In many instances, the perpetrator has isolated the victim. This is often done intentionally, and it keeps the victim from having access to individuals who may spot the abuse or may be able to help the individual. And so isolation can make a victim a target. The victim may have dementia, the victim may be frail, may be in poor health. In financial exploitation cases, a lot of times the victims are elderly people who are considered to have money or resources, finances, things that the perpetrator can steal for him or herself, the financial exploitation angle. So there's lots of different reasons why elders have been targets and are targeted for elder abuse. And so you want to think about that with your particular clients when you are looking at the indicators of abuse. One of the things that's really important to remember when we're talking about elder abuse is that anybody can be a victim. It doesn't fall along education or wealth or race or gender or marital status. Anybody can be a victim, and the perpetrator can be anyone as well. To some extent, the perpetrator, who is the perpetrator, may depend upon the location and the type of abuse. For example, if the victim is living in an institution like a nursing home, the perpetrator could be an employee of the nursing home. The perpetrator could be an employee of the nursing home, as well as another resident of the nursing home. Whereas if the abuse is domestic abuse, whereas the perpetrator is the caregiver, family relative, then the relative is the abuser. So the location of the abuse can make a difference in terms of who is the perpetrator. But anybody can be a perpetrator. The statistics that we do have shows that it is very often a relative, close family member. And the NCEA considers it to be a family issue. I mentioned just briefly that the location makes a difference. So domestic abuse is something that occurs in the community, whereas institutional abuse, as the name applies, occurs in a long-term care facility. So keep in mind that location can impact who is the perpetrator, the remedies available, the discovery of the abuse, and the types of the abuse. We hear of elder abuse occurring for residents of long-term care facilities just as often as we hear of cases of elder abuse occurring for people who are living in a home. The discoverability, however, may be different because if you have an individual in isolation in a home with a caregiver and no access to the outside world, it may be harder to discover than if the person is living in a long-term care facility where there are people in and out of the room and interacting with the victim on a regular basis. As an elder law attorney, you want to be aware of the indicators of abuse because you may see clients who are being abused regardless of the type. The indicators of abuse, of course, will be determinant on the type of abuse we're talking about. So, for example, a physical abuse case, the victim might show bruises, broken bones, burns in the shape of cigarettes, rope burns, spiral fractures, things like that that are indicators that the injuries have been inflicted on the person intentionally. Exploitation is a change in the financial situation. All of a sudden, the person's not paying her bills. She's run out of money. Something has gone wrong. It's really different. That can be an indicator that something has happened to the person and the person has been financially exploited. Neglect can vary depending upon the lack of care, but it may be that the person has developed bed sores, poor hygiene, or even malnutrition. So you need to pay attention to your clients. You need to not only listen to your clients, but you need to look at your clients because your clients may be bearing the signs of elder abuse on their bodies, or they may exhibit the signs of elder abuse in their behaviors. Caregiver behaviors, the caregivers who are providing the care for the victim, that could be some red flags as well because there could be some odd behaviors going on. If you're interacting with clients and their caregivers, pay attention to this as well. How is the caregiver treating the client. Is the person being verbally abused? Is the person being threatened? Is the person being isolated from friends and families and others? Does the caregiver leave the victim alone for long periods of time? Is the caregiver withholding affection to gain compliance? Does the caregiver threaten to put the elder in a nursing home if the elder doesn't do what the caregiver wants? Is the caregiver not following the care plan? Is the caregiver not responding appropriately to the victim? Odd behaviors. There should be indicators or red flags that you need to pay attention and think about this. I want you to think about your practices, because one of the things you may think about in an elder law practice is that you wouldn't ever see victims of elder abuse. And I'm going to suggest to you, even though I'm not in private practice, you will in fact see either people who have been victims and are coming to you for help, or people who are being victimized. I'm going to suggest to you as well that it may be happening more often than you think. So as I said earlier, you want to watch your clients for signs. Pay attention to not only how they look, but what they're telling you. Are there changes in their financial situation? Something is different. They may have in fact come to you for help because something has gone wrong. They may need to do some planning because they're planning for the long term. They may be afraid of their family member. They think their family member is stealing all their money. They may have good cause to think this. When clients are doing planning, they need to really carefully understand the importance of the selection of the agent or fiduciary. If you're drafting a power of attorney for your client, the client needs to think hard, and you need to counsel your client about the choice of agents under the power of attorney. It is critical that the client be selecting somebody who is trustworthy and who is going to follow the client's wishes. We have heard of cases of agents under powers of attorney using the power to steal from the client. This is not a session that talks about planning documents and the appropriate safeguards that you can put into them, but you do need to recognize that in terms of elder abuse, when clients are doing planning, clients need to think hard about their choice of agents, and you need to talk to your clients about it. Sometimes your clients will come in because they have been a victim and they need help from you. They may need you to sue the person to try to gain their money back. They may need you to get a restraining order against the person the perpetrator who is victimizing them. Different things may be occurring where you're trying to deal with the aftermath of what has occurred. Sometimes clients who have been victims of abuse, regardless of the type, may need a guardianship or protective proceeding, and that may be how the case comes to you as well. There could be other ways the case shows up in your office, but I want you to be aware that you will see cases where your clients have been victims. You need to understand the different types of abuse. You want to think about the indicators, and you want to look at your clients and listen to your clients. There are various remedies that may be pursued, not all of which will apply to you as an elder law attorney, that can be done on behalf of the client. Criminal statutes in your state criminalizing elder abuse, whether it's abuse, neglect, or exploitation. The statutes themselves may make the crime a higher crime because of the class of individuals who are the victims, vulnerable elders. Or it may be that the crime itself, the penalty is enhanced because of the type of crime that it is. Adult protective services may be an option for clients who have been victims of elder abuse if the client fits under the statute. Typically, the statute will have a criteria of vulnerability or something like that to fall under the coverage of the statute. And then there's adult protective services. The statute will set out the process to be followed, whether it's services that will be provided with consent or without consent, and the types of things that could be done to help the client. For your purposes, it's important to know about APS just because you may have a client who is in need of services and APS may be able to help. You may have a client who is already within the system and APS has been providing services. Or you may have a client where APS is pursuing protective proceedings against the client because of the client's vulnerability. For your purposes as well, if you have a client who is seeking redress, in addition to the planning that you may do, such as, for example, a need to revoke a power of attorney when the agent has used the power of attorney to financially exploit your client, there may be civil remedies available. Sometimes APS statutes will have a section that will deal with a civil cause of action against a perpetrator, or there may be statutes or common law remedies available as well. Sometimes administrative actions can be taken against a perpetrator depending upon the perpetrator and facility. So, for example, if the perpetrator is licensed, there may be administrative remedies that can be pursued against the perpetrator, or if the abuse occurred in the facility, there may be an ability to go after the facility for some kind of administrative sanctions as well. It would be important for you to look at your state statutes and your case law, as well as look at the remedies that might be available both at state or federal levels against facilities, if in fact that is the type of case you have before you. I think it's really important for all of us to know more about elder abuse. There are lots of efforts being made to try to combat elder abuse, regardless of the type of elder abuse. And there are 3 very good resources that I will recommend to you. There may be very state-specific resources for you, and there are lots of other good ones out there. I'm just going to offer these 3 for you and tell you a little bit about them. The National Center for Elder Abuse, which I referred to earlier, has a website, www.ncea.aoa.gov. The NCEA, National Center on Elder Abuse, is funded through grants by the Administration on Aging, so this is a federal program. They have a clearinghouse of information for victims, for families, and for professionals. They have lots of reports about statistics. They have information about the indicators of elder abuse. They have information about perpetrators, characteristics about victims, and lots of other things, so they're a good resource. In addition, the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging is a tremendous resource for all elder law attorneys on a number of subjects. If you have not ever visited the Commission's website, you really should do that right away. Not just for the information they have about elder abuse, but all the information that they make available for elder law attorneys. Their website is www.americanbar.org/groups/law_aging. They, on their website, have resources, they have statute information, they have charts that identify by particular issue how the different states respond in their statutes, as well as citations. So, for example, if you want to know whether your state requires mandatory reporting of elder abuse, you can go to the appropriate chart on the Commission's website, and it will list out not only your state, but all the other states, and give you a brief description of what is required. The third website I want to commend to you is the National Center for State Courts, Center for Elders and the Courts, which is http://eldersandcourts.org. Although much of the information on that website is directed at educating judges, there's still a lot of very useful information on that website regarding elder abuse as well as other important topics. So I would encourage you to read more about elder abuse, learn more about the indicators and types of elder abuse, and remember to listen to your clients and look at your clients. Thank you very much. I hope this session has helped you learn a bit more about what elder law attorneys need to know about elder abuse. If I can provide you with any assistance or you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me at Stetson University College of Law.